Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Closed Doors. And today, well, it's a nice weather and we have a cool workshop. Today's workshop is something that I love to do. Freezing motion, but also coaching the model. A lot of photographers don't realize that what they are shooting in front of the camera is also a human being. It has feelings. It responds to certain things. So when you make sure that your model is at ease, your photo shoot will be great. So today it's all about making the model at ease, making sure that the model performs right, but also about freezing motion. How does it work? How do you set up your strobes? What is the sweet spot of your strobes? All that kind of stuff. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So join us for today's episode of Behind the Closed Doors. The workshop, expression, motion, and probably a lot more. Okay, motion and expression. Most of all today we're going to create motion, of course. The expression we're just going to talk about in between the motion, because let's be honest, freezing motion is just absolutely awesome to do. For me it was actually the start of doing model photography. Let me rephrase that. It was not what got me into model photography, it's actually what got me really excited about model photography. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that just gets very excited by shooting a standard portrait of a model. You know, set up your lighting, create a nice backdrop, add some styling, and a portrait, yeah, it's there. But for me, it's more adding that little bit of backlighting, adding that accent light, getting that expression just right, and of course, freezing that motion. A model that just flicks her hair around, or a little bit of wind in the hairs, or a full-blown jump, or when she's standing still, just a little bit of motion in that pose. That's all about freezing motion. And your strobes are very important for this. Because do remember, a lot of the questions we get about freezing motion is actually about shutter speed. Now, in the studio, when you shoot with your strobes, you have to realize that you're actually shooting HDR. And not in the term of highly destructive retouching, but in the term of you're using two exposures. The first one is the flash. That's very, very fast, and often that's dictated by the T1 or T5 value, T01, T05. And that's actually the drop down in speed. Now, the higher the number, the more you can freeze your motion. I always tell people, like a little bit of a hint, your flash duration can be translated into your shutter speed. So if you have a flash that has a duration of 1/2000th of a second, you can do almost exactly the same stuff as you would normally do on 1/2000th of a second with ambient light. That means that when you want to freeze motion, you of course already know that if your strobe has a flash duration of 1/500th of a second, that will be very, very difficult. Unless you of course time it perfectly, and always remember when a model goes up, there's always this one point where she thinks like, should I go further up or down? And on planet Earth they normally go down. It would be weird if they would go up, right? So that's one point where they're actually almost frozen in the air and then they come down. But that timing is very, very difficult. So fast flash duration. Now the handles we use are very, very fast. They're about 1/5000th to almost up to 1/8000th of a second in the range where I use them. And that's also important, the range of the strobe. Now, the best thing to know for certain how your strobe works is actually getting a light meter that can meter flash duration, like for example the Psychonic 858, which I'm using. And you will find out that most strobe will have a very different ratio over the power boost. For example, on the lowest setting, my Hensel strobes are fast, but they're not really fast. Now, as soon as I go up to 50-60%, they are incredibly fast, almost the sweet spot. And after that, they drop down just slightly. So for freezing motion, for me, it's important to get the right sweet spot. Now, with the handles, it's not really a problem because the difference between 1/7,000th of a second or 1/4,000th of a second when freezing a motion, it's not that big of a difference. But if your strokes vary from, let's say, 1/800th of a second to 1/2000th of a second, it can be very important to find that sweet spot. Now, of course, if you don't have a fancy light meter like I do, use a common fan, like you use in the summer, right? Just make them speed up and then take pictures on several settings of your strobe, and you will find out which one froze that fan the best, and that's probably your sweet spot. So how does it work in the studio with your shutter speed? The shutter speed in the studio is determined by the X-sank. In other words, when does the second shutter curtain close? You know, the dreaded black bar on your frame if you shoot too fast. In the studio we can still use 125th of a second. For the very simple reason, with motion we often shoot on f11, f16 or f22 to make sure that everything in the frame is in focus, because the model will always move a little bit closer or a little bit further away. And you don't want to mess up that shot, right? So when we shoot on 125th of a second, f16 in our studio, and we don't use strobes, the image will be completely black. And that's the first thing you have to do in your studio. Make sure that when you shoot without strobes, your image is totally black. Now, as soon as you see a little bit of an outline, that's okay. But as soon as you can see your model, you probably have a lot of light in your studio, or you have to just raise that aperture up. So, if you have that black frame, as soon as you start adding the strobe, you'll probably already guessed it. The strobe will freeze the motion, because although 125th of a second will be a long time, that strobe will be very fast, and we always determine before we do the shoot it without your strobes. If the frame is black, there will be no interference from your ambient light, so the strobe does all the work. And that's the most important thing. Furthermore, it's coaching your model. Some models have problems with jumping, for example, from still up. They need a little bit of a run up and then they jump. If you want to make sure that you nail that focus correctly, put something on the floor like a lens cap and just tell your model, that's the lens cap, jump, and then be on your highest point on top of that lens cap. That often makes it much easier to visualize. But most of all, remember that you're working with a model. It doesn't work to constantly say, no, that was wrong. No, that was wrong. No, you missed the timing. The model jumps correctly, you missed the timing. So if something goes wrong, you just tell the model, oh, that was awesome, let's do it again. Oh, that was awesome, let's do it again. Because you have to keep the energy high on your model, especially when jumping. Also do remember that jumping can be really tiring. And don't use high heels. So, I'm looking forward to today. We're going to recreate some old-fashioned looks. I just love Richard Avedon's motion. Let's see if we can create something that... No, you can never create something like Richard Avedon, but at least we're going to take some inspiration from it. Are you ready? Students are almost here. I'm ready. Let's go. First setup, pretty simple. We want to build it up very slowly. A wind machine, some strobes and the click prop backdrops. Only portrait, just to get a little bit of motion in the hair. Of course, during the workshop we're going to do a lot more, but we started out really simple. Because let's be honest, you don't start running a marathon, you start very, very slow. So start with the portrait, get a little bit of motion in the hair, and this model has a lot of, well, curly hairs, so getting the motion in the hair is a little bit tricky, but it can work. And you can also make your model flip her head like this, and the hairs will just flow around. So that was the first setup. After this, we're going to do a white backdrop and a big softbox. Let's go.
example, a huge softbox and a white backdrop. A little bit of inspiration from Richard Avedon, and of course, it's not even close, but you can always get a little bit of inspiration from it and build from there to create your own stuff. And let's be honest, the model did a great job. So, simple lighting setup, but finding the sweet spot to really freeze the motion is of course key with these kinds of setups. So sometimes you have to raise the ISO just a little bit to get in that sweet spot of your strobe. And don't worry, ISO 400, even ISO 800, no problem at all in modern cameras. Find that sweet spot of your strobe with the fastest flash duration and adjust your camera settings for that. Don't shoot on f2.8, try to shoot on f11, f16, so you are sure that you freeze that motion. But also, keep the model sharp, because the model will always move a little bit forward, a little bit backwards, and on f11, f16, you're pretty sure you nail the focus every time. On 2.8, not so much. Okay, let's go to the next set. Okay, now I glued a few sets together for the very simple reason they have almost the same setup quality, but different, well, settings in between. Let me explain. The first setup was with the blue backdrop. It's a little bit inspired by Jill Greenberg. 2 harsh side lights, 1 light on the backdrop and 1 big softbox in the front, making a nice flat lighting with nice accents, and because of the light on the back you get a nice separation. The model pops out. Most important with this setup is getting that model right in between that spot on the backdrop. And don't get me wrong, that's really difficult. That's something that is, well, it takes a little bit of coaching and also finding your own position the best way to make sure that sees in that hot spot. Now with the other setups, we only changed the backdrop, make it a little bit more warm, change the lighting to the side, but the essence is the same. You create 1 light on your model, 1 accent light and a light on the backdrop to create that pop effect, that the model really comes back from the backdrop. Now with that spot on the backdrop, make sure that you try different settings. Maybe you like it a little bit more, maybe you like it a little bit less. Always experiment in extremes, so go full power, go low power, go in the middle, and then you will find which way you actually like. It happened a lot of times that I started out with a low setting, really fell in love with it and never tried the high setting. And then maybe a few weeks later, I tried the high setting and I was going like, oh, I wish I knew this before. So always try it out, even if it's a setup that you've done many times. Styling can make a huge difference if you like that spot brighter or darker. Trust me, experiment, and keep experimenting. For this setup we used our Lestolite backdrop and a chair. It's not really motion, but it's creating a flow in your image and of course coaching the model. Now the lighting setup is incredibly simple. One big softbox to create a nice wraparound effect around our model and a little bit on the backdrop. One accent light and, that's the cool thing about that Lestolite backdrop, one strobe behind the backdrop and it actually shines through the background. And it gives you a beautiful, beautiful wraparound effect. Very cool and a very, very nice setup to shoot. Okay guys, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Closed Doors. Do remember, this is not a tutorial, this is not an instructional video. I give you a lot of information, but for real tutorials, go to our website and go to the videos department. You will get a lot more info in those videos. And you also support our work. You can also support our work by joining our Patreon. Every month you will find portfolio reviews. Every day you can ask questions, you can interact with the other Patreons. It's just a very, very cool group to hang out with, online of course. And those videos for those portfolio shoots are really unique. We don't release them anywhere else, but you also get behind the scenes photos, behind the scenes videos, sometimes live streams behind the scenes. It's a very, very cool spot. And it starts at $1 a month. $1 a month. You support our work and you get a lot more extras. Okay guys, thank you so very much for watching. Join our channel by subscribing. Hit the bell notification if you want to be updated on live streams and of course videos. But most of all, tell other people about our channel so we can grow our channel. Thank you so very much for watching. Stay safe and see you next time. And keep shooting.